So welcome everybody. I'm delighted to have Ken Cousens with me today. He's in California. Hello, Ken.
Hi there. How are you?
Yeah,
Hi,
very
everybody.
well, thanks. Yeah, great. Thanks for being with us today, Ken.
Sure.
Now, as part of the Hidden Knowledge of Elite course, Understanding Freedom, a lot of people believe in the world that they are free, and perhaps a lot of people, you've probably heard it said, that these are the people who are the most enslaved, of course. So Ken's a person who's actually been working with getting himself freed up from the system in the sense of creating his own private society. And I'm going to talk to Ken a lot about this. But what he's got is called the Panterra de Oro Private Contract Association. And he's also got Gemstone University. And these are organizations which help people to effectively extract themselves from the system, but work with the system as well at the same time. So it's important to understand that it's not totally about cutting yourself off. It's about having your own sovereignty. I'm not sure if he likes that particular word, but it's standing free as a free living man on the land. I think that's the right terminology, as opposed to most of the people in the private, the actual other system, the system we're all in, where we're kind of like indebted slaves to the system. It's more public. So he's got a private system, and we all of us are kind of working in a public system, and it's about being enslaved to that system at birth through. And you probably heard a lot about people talking about birth certificates and so on. So what Ken and I are going to do for the next hour or two is to help clarify just how it is you can extract yourself from the system. Ken is really the proof of the pudding. He's actually managed to avoid paying taxes to the IRS in the US for about 30 years, which is quite amazing. So, and he's got a pussycat I can hear as well. So I think that,
Here, he wants to introduce himself.
Yeah, why not? Hi there, fella. Yeah. I used to have a cat like that. Oh wow. Absolutely. I had a cat just so like that. Sadly, she passed over last year. We miss her. We miss her so much. She's probably coming through. She's always the diva, wanting to get attention.
If you hear him talking, he likes to talk while I'm doing the interview. So he's adding his
teamed up with my ex-cat. Who knows? So really, Ken's the proof of the pudding. He's been doing this for 30 years or so, and he's actually been very successful in creating this society. And probably a lot of people, are confused. Is it worthwhile going through the process of extracting themselves from the system? It's a lot of work sometimes to do this. And also, people are aware in the UK and across Europe and across America that the jails are littered with people who really in the last couple of decades have tried to do this. Now, I personally, first of all, heard all about this world from a guy called John David Van Hove. And
Johnny Liberty.
Yeah, Johnny Liberty, that's the guy. And I was across in 2001, 2002 in California, and a good friend of mine, Sergio Lube, gave me a load of CDs. And this guy was talking about all these, how to become sovereign, how to, extract yourself from the system and so on. But quite amazingly, he ended up in jail for 2.5 years. And, he had so much knowledge, and it made everybody kind of like just sit up straight and go, well, if he goes to jail, what chance have we? So one of the, things we've got to clarify is, how is it that Ken has actually lasted 30 years in this very, very, kind of like war zone kind of world. Also, it would be good to clarify how effective it's been, Ken, for your own members, your society, and also a lot of what we do is the multidimensional side of things here. So I wanted to kind of understand the esoteric multidimensional way it fits in, and maybe we can finish by looking at the artificial intelligence world, where, how is this really going to come in and affect us from a point of view of freeing ourselves from the system and what the governments and the other bodies are actually doing. So I thought we could start by just, if you could give us a summary of how we've got into this state. How come we are all, legally debt slaves to the system? And I know that it goes back many, many years. So maybe you can just give us a quick overview of where this has all come from even thousands of years ago, and how we've come to where we are today, where we are these debt slaves.
Sure. All right. Well, thank you very much. Well, you touched on some very key points and key words. On the land, sovereignty, war zone, field of battle. You didn't use field of battle, but you referenced that. And then that question, that point about Johnny Liberty, who actually I met in 1994 or 95. And my wife and I were living in Hawaii on the island of Maui. And I hosted Johnny to come over and present his work to people there on Maui. So I go back 23, 24 years with him. And he was a leader at that time. Why did he end up going to jail? Yeah. It gets down to 3 words. These are my 3 magic words. It's called status, standing, and capacity. Have you heard me talk about that or seen it in anything that I write?
I have heard you, I think, talk about it, but I can't remember the detail of it. So perhaps you could help us, if you explain that to us, what that means.
Okay. Well, I was going to throw it back to you and say, what would you understand those 3 words to mean?
Okay.
I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, status, standing, and what was the third one?
Capacity.
Capacity, gosh.
Capacity.
Well, for me, your status is who you are as a person in terms of how does the whole system view you as a person. So I know that when I was born, I had a birth certificate, and I was born actually a living person from the point of view of the hospital. And somehow that got translated into a birth certificate. That birth certificate was then registered by the Registrar General in the UK. And that, as I understand it, went into effectively Seswi KV type trust. And that changed my status from being a living person on the land to being a indebted slave working or living under the law of the sea. So it's effectively I operate under Admiralty law. I operate under the law of the sea, whereas the status of somebody who's elite or royal operates under a different system, which is under the law of the land. So from a point of view of status, my status is I'm an indebted debt slave to a system which is a bonded debt slave. Effectively, I'm traded on the stock market, or I have X million pounds of dollars worth of earning potential in a lifetime, and that my status is that I don't own that. Somebody else owns that, and I'm effectively just a person who is dead, who is working under this Seswi KV Act, this sort of law of the sea, under these draconian kind of Admiralty type laws. And that's how I see my status personally. Don't know if that's what you mean by that. I don't know.
Sure. That's very good. How about the other 2 words, standing and capacity?
Standing and capacity. Well, I probably have absolutely no standing whatsoever, in the sense
very
that
good. That's true.
If I was hauled into a court for a speeding fine or something like that, I have absolutely no standing. I'm a dead person, effectively, and I therefore, I suppose, in capacity, I don't have the capacity to challenge the system. I don't have the capacity to move forward in what I want to do as a free person, as a living person on the land. I am forever at the moment, an indebted, bonded debt slave to the system, which is really a trust-based system that goes across the world. And it's highly complex, and it's something
Yes,
that.
it is.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say it is very complex, but it's kind of like learning to play the violin. It's quite hard. It's complex. You have to learn music. You have to learn physical dexterity and things like that. You have to do scales up and down the board for hours and days and years.
Yeah.
But when you master it, when you actually embody it and integrate it, then you can improvise. You know who you are. You essentially have standing within the knowledge and the integration of that knowledge for how to play your instrument. So, so that's just to the point of people will self-eliminate themselves from engaging with this and not undertake it because they think it's too complex or it's above my capacity or my capability, but it's really not. And we'll get into that later in the conversation.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ken. I think that a lot of people have got a fear about this world, and and the fear comes from the Van Hoves, the Dean Cliffords, the Sean Devon Morton. He was put in prison, last year for 6 years, and they've all been trying to do things, but I know they don't do it the way you do it. And I think that you have a lot more knowledge and a lot more success with keeping a very integral system together, which really does work.
Yes. So let me get into that and define status, standing, and capacity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Status. Now the dog's getting into the into the motion.
We had a dog. I missed them, actually. We don't have any dogs.
It's our next door neighbors, and that dog's okay. But we have 3 little yappy dogs. If they come in, we're gonna have to deal with that.
Okay.
Anyway, so I'm a linguist, not professionally speaking, but I've studied language and writing and roots of words, etymology, things like that. That's one of the fundamentals of studying law, and really studying ourselves is understanding our interaction and interface with others, the world system, and so forth through the mechanisms of language. And we'll get into that a little bit too. But the reason I bring it up now is because the word status is etymologically, which means the root of words, related to the word state, the word static, the word estate, things like that. And it comes from Latin, with that S-T-A-T being essentially the root of these words. So state of being can be the same or an equivalent to when we say status, because and let's also define, you reference to yourself as a person. Okay, well, a person is an artificial entity as far as the system is concerned. It's the mask or the way we present into this field of reality that we call the world system. That word comes from 2 Greek words for persona, which was originally the Greeks who created basically stage theater, comedy and tragedy, and they had actors who would play different roles, and they would have masks, and they played different roles, male and female. And so to distinguish which character they were playing, they would have a mask with the face according to the character. And because they didn't have amplification, they were in amphitheaters, and they had to project their sound. The mask had this little megaphone on it, and they called that the persona, which was which means through, sona, which is sound, sonar and related. So that's where the sound goes through. So when you get into a deeper level, both esoterically and who we are in terms of our being as an integrated whole being of physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, soul level, outside of time and space being, that we move through this body, we create through this body, through sound resonance, basically, and that's why it's related to language. That's why the word jurisdiction basically has something to do with the same etymology, because the word diction or dicta means to speak, or referentially to sound. Right. So we create through our body as a sound resonance of our spirit coming into manifested reality in this world.
I mean, on that point, yeah, I was just going to say on that point, Ken. I mean, it's very much what I have been showing on the Hidden Knowledge of the Elite course in terms of the soul and how the soul comes down and we incarnate many times. So, the people on the course are very aware of what you're saying there in terms of this concept of the spirit coming down.
Yeah. So what we distinguish is the difference between the person, which is the artificial fictional entity that the state, the corporate state, the global state creates, through which are being resonant sounds, or through a persona into being able to function within their world of commerce and corporate structure and monetary systems and all of that, distinguished from me as a living being. And so we are always living beings. We are never persons. And we'll get into this. This is an important distinction. But we are attached by voluntary adhesion or acceptance by contract to being in a specific relationship or status relationship to that person. So the person, that is created with the birth certificate is an artificial entity. It's a creature of the state. It was created by the state. We have two choices in our relationship to that. We can be attached to it through a commercial Admiralty legal relationship, and that status is called bonded surety, right, which now is sort of disseminating out into sort of the field of awareness of more and more people. 5 to 10 years ago, nobody heard that phrase. I actually coined that phrase and started bringing forward those three words of status, standing, and capacity, because all the people you mentioned, from Sean David Morton to Johnny Liberty to many, many, many people who pioneered and who I studied with and were masters at many, many levels of the system.
Yeah.
They failed to understand this one key point. And we'll get into it a little bit more, a little bit about my history of how I evolved to this awareness. But the key is that we always have a status, and we can either be the bonded surety, which means we're bonded, which means attached, and the word bond in the legal monetary definition means a debt instrument. So we become the surety, which is the guarantor, which does go back to a maritime term where the word insurance originated as a maritime term called assurance or assurance, to assure something. And what was that in effect? It was, 1200s, 1300s, 1400s, men went to sea, and they were in a ship on the sea, and they were moving from port to port. And a port is a doorway or an entrance between the land and the sea. And of course, the king had authority on the land, and he also had authority by creating his Admiralty to control his flagships on the sea. So there's all this historical lineage or sequence of evolution that led us to where we're at today.
Where do you think it really goes back to, Ken? Does it? I mean, I've been looking at this for quite a while, and I know you've talked in the past about it, like being Egyptian, Babylonian, so on. But in my research with likes of Plato, for example, he talks about the gods a lot, these supernatural beings that are interacting with humanity, the multidimensional beings. And I don't know if you've looked at that side of it in the sense of, maybe we can get onto this later because it's quite a big subject, actually. But
actually, it'd be, and I have quite extensively.
Good. Okay,
I mean, I've been involved. I've been involved in metaphysical pursuits, esoteric pursuits, and all of that for almost 60 years.
Right.
So,
Okay. Yeah. So you know it pretty well.
And this is a key too, that many of those researchers we're talking about and referring to have not done so.
Yeah.
Or they've taken a more narrow route in terms of what they have adopted in their spiritual path in a biblical or a Christian context.
Yeah, it doesn't
and
work.
That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah,
but let's stay on focus in terms of just defining and creating the framework.
Yes.
So it's important to understand that where we are today, and when we talk about things like being on the sea of commerce, being a commercial vessel, being bonded, to the vessel as a guarantor, which is what surety means. These all evolve from these engagements of the players on the world scene going back hundreds and thousands of years.
Right.
And it goes down to fundamentally there's two basic components on the planet we live on: land and sea, terra firma and the waters.
Yeah. The more
we
firmer, the less terror, as they say.
Yeah, exactly. We could get into Greek and Roman mythology and who was Poseidon versus Zeus and who was Hades versus, all that. These are all constructs. We could call them mythological constructs, but they're projections of who we are internally, because we have ultimately created this realm that we're in. The issue is whose agenda and whose blueprint are we creating? We are the creator here. And all subjects of who's God or who are the gods and stuff, we'll get to that later. But the bottom line is we are the conduit through which creation takes place.
Agreed.
And so so the inner reflects the outer, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And so back to the issue of status, and we'll get into those things about commercial vessel, lost at sea, maritime insurance, assurance, and how that all relates.
Yeah.
But the fundamentals are that when men went to sea and they carried cargo on the ship, they would document it so that when they came into a foreign port, they could present that documentation, and the authority or the sovereign on that particular land who controlled that port would, through his officers at the port, determine what could or could not come in. Was there tariffs or taxes or tribute or other things like that? And that document was known as a bill of lading. And so out of this emerged what is a bill, what are bills of exchange as documentary drafts for monetary value, so that a man could travel, whether on land and sea, and a banker would give a documentary draft or an assurance document that says, yes, I'm holding, 10,000 ducats or sovereigns or, florins of gold, and I assure through my seal and so forth that if this is presented, this document is a demand instrument that can be exchanged as a bill of exchange for goods, can be put back on that cargo ship, brought back, all those kind of things. This is how the monetary system evolved. So getting to our modern issue, the status of almost every man and woman and child on this planet is a bonded surety to a bankrupt franchise. So then that gets the question, what is a bankrupt franchise? Well, all the nation states that we think about today, the UK, Australia, the United States, Mexico, and so forth, are corporations. And they all channel through the United States Corporation, through Washington, D.C., and the Securities Commission and Securities Exchange and so forth. And those all ultimately are underneath the master corporation, which is the Crown Corporation in the City of London. And they were all put into bankruptcy over the last 200 years. Basically, the sovereign state of Britain was put into bankruptcy by the 1750s. It became a bankrupt debtor to the Bank of England. And then when the United States supposedly gains its independence a little bit later, then it did gain independence. There were free and independent states. They did form a union, but then very quickly they formed other entities that were crown corporations. The United States of America, as placed in the Constitution of 1787, belonged to the crown. Okay, the office of the president.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you about. Sorry to interrupt that. I was going to ask you about just this whole world scene, because it's interesting you say that effectively the United States now is controlling that whole kind of crown corporation from a point of view of the legality of things. Now, I view
the United States doesn't control the crown. The crown owns the United States.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, so that's my understanding. I'm sorry.
No, but everything channels to the United States of America, the federal entity. Right?
Yeah, because there's the third element.
As I'm sure you, as I'm sure you know,
which is the Vatican, and
right. Well,
we can talk about
and as you know,
as we come into it.
Yeah, there are. Sorry, as you know, exactly what you said. There are 3 sovereign city-states on the planet, and always, because you have really penetrated into the depths of the esoteric and the metaphysical, multidimensional, we always come back to who are we? How do we create? As I said earlier, we have 3 primary conduits, if you will, or bodies that we create within this physical realm: physical, emotional, and the mental. Or you could call it the root, the heart, and the mind. Mind, body, spirit. Those are interchangeable. And so we've projected all of that outside of ourselves and abrogated our own internal capacity and authority and power into an externalized hologram that created it through those 3 bodies. So you can look at the military commercial structure of Washington, D.C. as the physical body, or bonding the physical. You can look at the crown as the mental through the banking and the law and the binding of the mental plane. You can look at the Vatican as controlling the emotional, the body, the heart, and all these metaphors that they use, the Sacred Heart and the Mother Church and things. These are all projections. But if we consider that we have 7 to 8 billion biocrystalline projecting units, projecting reality and creating it through the filter of their blueprint, this is what we have. And we'll get into this as well, but the bottom line in terms of status, standing, and capacity is when we take full responsibility for what we've created and we bring it back into our true capacity, our true self. And a lot of people argue and complain about that. I didn't create, the NSA and the CIA and the war machine and blah, blah, blah. But we did.
Yes.
Not that was our choice or what we came here to do, although really it is what we came here to do. We came here to deal with this construct so that we could take it upon ourselves, like wrapping ourselves with the clothing of the realm, because we have the power and the capacity to transmute that and redirect it into a new creation.
I think that the transmutation stuff is very important. It's something I do talk a lot about within the hidden knowledge of the elite, and it really is to do with understanding why on earth are we coming down lifetime after lifetime. Because we at a soul level, I was able once to see the human soul as part of what I show within the course, and it's the most beautiful thing. It's like a liquid mirror, and it's kind of like breathing, and it has all these amazing colored lights around it, and everybody's is different. I've seen a number of people's souls. And really that, why does that soul come down, incarnate over a certain lifetime, live 70 to 100 years typically, and then pass over, and then, come back again and come back in and come back again. And what I concluded after looking at this for a long time is that we're really evolving as a species by doing that. And the key evolution point is understanding our emotional interactions with each other. And it's in line with what you're saying there, that, we do have, like a mental and a physical and a kind of emotional side to it. And, those are reflected externally, but it's not just in these bodies. To me, they're reflected in everybody we're sitting in front of, every time and every minute of the day. There's an emotional interaction going on with these people. And the key thing is to understand how that emotion is being transmuted into full consciousness. So you are brought in, and you have all these hidden emotions from the parental DNA and interactions with the early parental sort of, and schools and whatever. But each time that interaction happens, to me, it's like an opportunity to see what's hidden in you and make it conscious. And that is our true evolution as sort of humanity. So yeah, I'm right with you when you're talking about this externalization of the three systems, because we have created this.
Mm-hmm. Yes. When one can see that and really embody that is the case, then we start pulling our own power back into ourselves. Because to complain, to polarize with the world system, which is what many of those researchers that we talked about,
they're angry, they're
created
fighting.
the world system, the bankers or the politicians or the hidden hands as the enemy.
Yeah.
And when you do that, you become attached to it.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And we'll also get into that. So, but let's bring it back to the beginning point that we started with. Oops. Okay, there you go. Your picture froze for a second.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So status, standing, and capacity. So that is our status through the mechanisms of the way the system is set up. Basically, fundamentally, you mentioned SESTA-KV, the SESTA-KV Act. Fundamentally, the entire world system, and you mentioned trust as well, but you didn't mention estates. Remember, I said the word status,
yes,
it etymologically has the same root as the word estate.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, everything in the world system in terms of how property or wealth or value is held is in an estate. Okay. And you can go back to the landed gentry or the aristocracy who controlled the land, and they had a co-relationship with the sovereign, and the sovereign held all the land ultimately. This goes back to Egypt, it goes back to Sumerian and Babylonian structure, and it goes to the fundamental in the esoteric arena, which has to do with how the temples were originally created and what the temples were, both as control mechanisms, the binding of the people through the religious aspect, and the entry point of the so-called gods, and what you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And this was defined by our physical, mathematical, geometric relationship to the planet and the solar system, by how two pillars were oriented to the east, where the horizon the sun would rise on the solstices and the equinoxes, and create on the solstices create angled points, and there would be two pillars. And so that's talked about in the book of Genesis. It's talked about in the Masonic, and it's in architecture everywhere. And that's a primary symbol and resonant holding point of our consciousness that's been implemented for many thousands of years.
Yeah.
And then in a social, political, and religious context, all of which underwrites the legal monetary, those two pillars represented the line of the king and the line of the priest. Essentially, the king owned and controlled the land by virtue of the so-called descent of kingship from the gods, and the priests, who had the authority of the gods to maintain their temples, were the line of the priests and controlled the law. So it's all very simple. The king controls the land and lifts the people off the land and puts them into a containment field, an energetic containment field that they have voluntarily ascribed to. And that's very important because we do live in a sovereign free will universe. So I don't use sovereignty. You mentioned that. That's a belabored and bastardized term that has been turned around, because that again, people are saying, well, the king's not sovereign, I'm sovereign, blah, blah, blah. Well, yes, in a spiritual multidimensional sense, we are sovereign. But the real key in terms of the legal monetary system, freedom versus bondage and slavery, is, are you solvent? Meaning, do you have standing within the way the world system is set up, insolvency as opposed to bankruptcy? Because when you go into bankruptcy, you are insolvent. And according to Admiralty law and civil procedure and all the rest of it, a bankrupt has no standing to state a claim, because he or she is under a trusteeship, and the trustee controls the estate. So when we are born, we are given an estate to operate in the commercial zone. But the true underlying estate, the estate that the aristocracy have had in the co-relationship with the sovereign, that's held in abeyance because we are considered to have abandoned them. And so they step in under another maritime phrase called claim and salvage. They can claim, if a boat shipwrecks on the shore and is abandoned, anybody can claim it and salvage it. Okay, same thing. We go back to those maritime terms and so forth. So the aristocracy in their estates, their landed.
Sorry, Ken, I was just saying that, do you think it was the Phoenicians who started that law system back maybe somewhere 5 to 10,000?
Yeah, as part of it, but hold that thought.
Yeah, okay.
Because I want to go back to the co-relationship between the king and his aristocracy.
Right.
They created a relationship which was called an oath of fealty, that the sovereign would create a grant of land made patent by his letter and seal, and the lord of the manor receiving that grant would extend an oath of fealty, which is an oath of jurisdiction.
Right.
Because the word juris in Latin means law, but it also means an oath, a binding oath. And of course, diction means the words. So the basis of jurisdiction is the sovereign's capacity to grant the land and receive a oath of loyalty or fealty, and that created that relationship. So that was how estates evolved, because they were landed estates, or landed gentry, and the holder of that estate was always a living man, and that living man was called a sestake.
Right.
Because there's two phrases that are very important: sestake, trust, or a sestake. Okay. People get these mixed up, and they can refer to a sestake trust.
Yes.
That's not accurate. Right. A sestake by definition means a living beneficiary, because the V or vi, some people pronounce it vi, V-I-E,
right,
means life. It's
French, isn't it? C'est la vie and stuff.
C'est la vie, or vivir in Spanish, or vivre in French. It means life. Okay, viva, viva la France. It means life.
Yeah.
Okay, and so a sestake means that to which it refers to, or that the object of the life. And specifically, sestake is defined as the life by which the duration, which means start and finish, of the estate is defined.
Right.
So when I'm born, if I'm an heir apparent or a crown prince, and I'm born into the status of being the sestake in waiting, so to speak, it's because my father is the current living beneficiary, whose life defines the extent or the duration of the estate. When he dies, I ascend to that position, or in the royalty, ascend to the throne. That's why the phrase is always, the king is dead, long live the king, or why they speak as we, And because they not only have that royal estate, they have that lineal estate by legal or law, and as well as genetics or the DNA. Right. So you have groups, call them, we won't call them soul groups because at this point they don't have souls, but they are overlaying control groups that do control the reincarnational cycle. So, for me, as I've studied this over the years and decades, it always occurred to me, without knowing this knowledge, but intuitively I knew that, look at the Rothschilds or the royal lines and so forth, and they speak of themselves in the we. We are not amused, we this, we that. But it is a we, because they're grounding in a incarnate form of a collective. Yes. That continues to incarnate. So when they created this system of estates and living beneficiaries and, crown princes and so forth, that is how they accrued the global estate, seemingly, with their system that says we own everything and you are not on the land because you have accepted by voluntary expression of your sovereign free will to volunteer to become the bonded surety and accept the benefits, the commercial and civil privileges that we have given you, and you've accepted that contract.
But the whole system is based on these people, like the Queen in 1953 in her coronation. She would swear allegiance to a certain god, and this particular god in the West that she was dealing with was called Yahweh. And what a lot of people don't understand is that these gods are real and they're alive, and they do interact with this kind of royal lineage. Now, what I noticed within the context of the Panterra organization that you have, at a very high level, your authority is established in some sort of similar covenant with a kind of very high level source. Call it the source, or I don't know what you call it, but I call it overall consciousness. There is only one consciousness. It is
we definitely don't call it Yahweh. That's for sure.
Now that's key, see, because with a lot of these elites, they've gone with the Poseidons and all these Zeus's and all these sort of people you talked about, and these are real, gods that live, and some are living now, and they interact with humanity. And it's almost like there's a massive distortion going on with people believing they're in the Catholic, the Judaic, and whatever type of religions, and they are interfacing with the true and one God, but they're actually interfacing with kind of lower gods, and that gives them, though, in law, in their private law worlds, an authority. That's how they see it. So these gods are giving them authority. And it's interesting, I noticed within the context of your private association, you also actually, but you seem to go to the true source as opposed to a lower god. But you also are getting authority from a very high level.
Well, I don't quite word it that way. When... First of all, let me explain this in terms of law. Yeah. And we still have to finish with standing and capacity.
Yeah, we'll do it.
We'll get there. I keep track of the threads. Yeah. But basically, well, first of all, let me just say this as a encapsulating statement, that the path to freedom is to not play the game, to recognize that we have voluntarily adhered ourselves by contract to their system. Well, if it's voluntary, we also have the capacity and the right, when asserted, to sever that attachment. And that's fundamentally what we do. And then the key is that the field of commerce, the commercial arena that we've bonded ourselves to, that we've allowed our franchise and our bonded surety relationship to that, to become within the realm of bankruptcy. Because back to what I was saying, all nations are actually corporations, and they're all in bankruptcy. And they've all been forced through the bankruptcy to pledge themselves to the United Nations and to the International Monetary Fund, so that the central banks that in turn bond all the domestic population are pledged as a collateral pledge to this global world monetary system.
Right.
And we have the right and the capacity, with the knowledge that we have now in Gemstone University and Panterra, the Aura Private Society, to teach each other and work together to gain that knowledge and guide our members through the steps of how to sever that attachment.
Right.
Because it's all a matter of consent. And if you do not consent, and this operates on the legal level, the lawful level, and as well as the spiritual or the multidimensional, which gets back into what really is going on with the death-life cycle of reincarnation. Because when we volunteered to be bonded to this debt system, and then we die, we drop the body, and we die in debt, then those overlaying control systems, which the one aspect I would suggest you reorient your thinking, that these are not necessarily, first of all, they're not gods. We know that they had technology that groups of people were overwhelmed by, in the appearance of magic and authority and power and flying machines and magic, nuclear tip blow darts and things like that.
I have managed to move my consciousness into the dimensions and see some of these beings, so I know what they look like and I know what they do. So,
but they're collectives. There's collectives. So there's not one being who is Yahweh. It's a collective, and that way, let's set that aside. But the point being is that the way not to play the game is to remove oneself from the playing field, because the field of commerce, where documentary drafts of monetized debt, which are called Federal Reserve notes or US dollars or British pounds or euros, all those debt instruments, which are commercial paper that circulate as currency, those operate in the arena of commerce. And commerce is a field of battle. So you're at war when you're operating in commerce. And so all the people out there in the world who are against war and who want peace have to ask themselves, well, if I want peace, why am I participating 24/7, 365 in a field of global warfare? Okay. And it's not just about, I'm not going to pay my taxes and support the war machine. It is energetically and spiritually the bottom line, that unless we sever that consensual relationship to allow our life force and our greater capacity energy to go into that system, until we stop that, we are equally part of the war machine. And we're allowing our life force to go into that hologram and create it. So that's why I say we did create it. We are responsible for it. But in that responsibility, we can be empowered to raise our awareness and our knowledge, how to redirect that and how to use our life energy to build something different.
I agree. I feel that we come down in many different guises each lifetime, so that we've had probably times of being the elite or the dark, and times where we're being light, and in each lifetime it's almost like the situation gives us a chance to evolve through becoming conscious of our emotional interactions with people. And the soul is very key to this, because the soul sits at a very timeless level. And what's happening there is that the soul has effectively designed the whole lifetime before it's happened. It's very difficult to understand that. But
the multiple lifetimes.
Absolutely. And it's when you actually go up levels into the kind of collective soul of humanity, it is stunning when you think about what we're doing, through billions of people and incarnating and interacting, in the way
creating this realm. Exactly.
It's just incredible, really.
So, so back to the issue of status and standing. What we guide our members and teach them about is, yes, everything in commerce, everything we've allowed and attached ourselves to, is in the martial maritime reality field of battle.
Just explain a bit more for people how we're in a martial law situation right now, right across the world? Because people think of martial law as something that's going to come in the future with the jackboots on the neck, and it's going to happen, you know, with the army coming out in the streets. But actually, are we not already in martial law right across the world right now?
Across the world. But let me finish with what I was saying with the status and standing. So removing oneself from the field of battle, going to peace, standing in peace, and resolving both the karmic debt as well as the commercial liability debt, and separating ourselves from that liability that's contained in one of the two estates that operate. Because when we're born, we're separated from our ancestral lineage, which is the genetic line that is both linear in time as well as outside of time, as you said, in the soul, because genetics or DNA are who we are in our complete life stream and multidimensionality. So we've been reduced both energetically, mentally, and biologically to a two-strand, two-dimensional relationship to our genetics, and it has been captured, and that's what they use to entrain our creator capacity to create this holographic reality. And so on top of that is something called the decedent estate. And in the IRS code and in the codes of the world system, a decedent doesn't mean a dead person. It means a dying person. Okay. So we are dying from birth until death, and we are controlled within, it's not just a debt and martial system, it's also a cult of death. And everything we ascribe to and we underwrite with our signature and everything else that we do is basically promoting death. And you can see the whole world system is built around it. So it's a matter of stepping into life, standing on the land in life, and not accepting being part of the machine or the realm of the dead.
Absolutely. And this is so what Panterra or a private contracts association, PCA, does. You help people to go through the steps to
exactly, and to learn and understand this, and then to integrate it. Right. So in terms of standing, if you're a bankrupt, you have no standing, and without standing, you cannot state a claim, and therefore you are required to be attorned, which means to turn in by an attorney who is a oath-bearing, bonded servant of the Temple Bar and the Crown Corporation to manage its property through the world system. And therefore you must be attorned or brought into their ship, because actually the judges and the attorneys, the term esquire that all attorneys receive as a title of nobility, the minimum rank that one must achieve to be an esquire is a captain. So they are captains of the sovereign or the crown, who under letters of marque and reprisal, which means an authorized legal piracy to board the vessels of an enemy combatant or a ship of a foreign flag at war with the sovereign, which we are defined as enemies of the state operating in their commercial realm on vessels of commerce, that they board our ship and they can plunder it. They bring us into their court, which is a vice admiralty court, because they're authorized under the Admiralty to adjudicate the commercial and maritime rules under civil procedure, to adjudicate how the booty and plunder and prize will be handled and separated. And so we have no standing in that system, because we're a bankrupt, we're a captured enemy vessel, and they adjudicated in their vice admiralty courts. So, but conversely, when we remove ourselves from the field of battle, sever the contractual relationships, and do all the steps necessary, and they're not like 2 or 3 just sign this paper and record it at the county. There's a lot you have to do. But in the doing, you integrate it, you incorporate it in your own being, and that is a process of self-empowerment. Once you've done that, you have the standing to state a claim, and the ability, and stating a claim is equal to the phrase staking a claim. To stake a claim means you have the standing to stake stakes in the land and claim this land. Okay, and when you do that, now you have standing on the land. So this is where status correction of status, attaining standing, having the ability to stake a claim on the land. Now you are truly on the land. Now you have capacity, and the word capacity is equal to the word capacitor or capacitance.
Right.
If you have a car, you're in the old cars you had the distributor and the sparks and all that, and it put energy into the capacitor so it could keep on sparking the spark plug and running the engine. Having a capacitance means you have the holding of the energy, and you can direct that energy, your life force, to creating what you want, what we want, in terms of a world that honors life and honors all beings. When you don't have capacity, or you don't control your capacity, you're like that little battery, like Morpheus held up in the movie The Matrix.
Yeah.
And what does the capacitor do? It discharges a charge. It builds a charge and discharges it. What do they do when they bring you into their Admiralty courts and their Maritime bankruptcy adjudication? They charge you. So they go into your underlying estate that holds the real value. They monetize it through the name of the franchise. They charge you. So they are creating a charge that must electrically be discharged. And so you, as the surety, are going to hold the liability. It means you have to pay the fine, do the time, pay the taxes, do all those things that their system requires you to do, because you've contractually accepted the benefits of that.
So what have you done such that you haven't paid tax for 30 years, for example? I mean, how have you set up the Panterra d'Oro, or I think you have a kind of charitable, or a court of Ecclesia. You have a number of elements within the context. How does this come together? How does it work? And how does it help you in terms of keeping these people at bay? I think it's very important to try and solve.
Sure. Well, let me define a couple of key points. What is a society, and what is an ecclesiastical body?
Yeah.
So most people will immediately go with the term ecclesiastical to the religious definition.
It's normal. They would.
Okay. If you go to a Webster's dictionary or a law dictionary, it will say that ecclesiastical means of a church doctrine, or a church form around a specific doctrine, generally referred to or referenced as a Christian doctrine. So most people think, oh, well, you guys are ecclesiastical, so therefore you are creating a new religion. Not true. We are very antithetical to religion as it is classically or traditionally been created, because again, this gets back to language. Religion means to bind again. What do you do when you go to get insurance? You're given a binder. It binds you to the monetary control of the issuer of that binder. Because insurance, basically, say I have a car and it's worth $20,000 and I want to insure it in case I get into a wreck. I want to replace the car. Well, what they do is, because they control the franchise, you sign on the contract, you give them the ability to go into...
Ken, you're breaking up a bit. Could you just say that last sentence again? Sorry.
So religion, by definition, means to bind oneself. And so we're binding ourselves to the secular version of their universal religion. And the word Catholic is defined as universal. Ultimately, we know that they want to have a one world system, a one world currency, a one world religion, and a one world state. Okay. So as I was saying, I'm quite antithetical to being a religion. I'm not into religion. I'm not into binding myself. I'm not into guiding anybody else to bind themselves.
You're an anarchist.
But in the true sense of it, but I am definitely into using what has been created in the system and drilling down to the bedrock in terms of what is the real substantive definition of these words we use and how do we define it, because a private society has the authority to create its own law form. It is its own jurisdiction. Has create its own bank. It create its own court. So these two things interconnect, and this is how the world system is constructed through estate law, but also what is a society. And basically, a society is when two or more come together and create a body politic, and that body is physical. So the term ecclesia in the Greek means the body of the congregation. But we're here to be embodied in the physical reality and not projecting ourselves into their fictional hologram.
Yes.
And so they use their terms. We define it as ours. You know, the term corpse or corpus means body. It's used in trust law, the corpus of the trust.
Yes.
Obviously, it's used biologically that the corpus means the body when or corpse when someone dies. It's the physical body.
Yeah.
So the body of the congregation means when two or more come together physically and pledge themselves to each other in terms of a jurisdictional framework for how will we operate within our society. That creates the law form, that creates the jurisdiction, and so forth. So we can use their ecclesiastical framework, but theirs is fictional. It's a holographic. So they create everything as corporations. A corporation, you take that word, it means the dead body through which we orate, or the person through which we direct sound. You know, corpus oration. You know, so they're creating civilly dead bodies, corpuses or corpse, through which the sound of creation channels through and manifests, but it doesn't have substantiality. It is only substantiated by the creator, or that which has substance. And so so the body of the congregation, as we use it, court of the Ecclesia, means physically when we have standing, we've severed that fictional attachment as a bonded surety status, and we come together to create. And that creates a unity field, or a unified field of consciousness, that when one or two or half a dozen do that, it's got power to it, but it doesn't have that real capacity that we need to come together in a unified field to create the reality we wish to create in this world. And so that's why Panterra, which means across the world, or you know, sort of a unified field of terra, the earth, is about creating a non-hierarchical, decentralized system of coming together through education and media. And essentially, in the same way that creation itself happens, we continually are birthing new societies that people direct themselves. It's not about a hierarchical, you know, like, oh, well, Panterra is the originating court, so now we own you jurisdictionally. Yes, we come together in unified, you know, capacity to protect ourselves. But it's not about a hierarchy. As if
you give people the ability to create their own society, effectively, which is separate from Panterra, and therefore obviously separate from the existing system we live in. And
I wouldn't say it is separate, because it's important that we maintain that unified field.
Right.
But it's decentralized. It's the same thing that's been emerging through crypto, digital currencies, decentralization. The one key thing is that it's not bonded to, and it's not registered within their system. So this gets to your question of how have I managed to do what I've done for the last 30 years and stay safe. For one, I stayed under the radar until about 8 years ago. And I didn't follow the path of the enemy construct that most of my mentors, not most, virtually all of them, a lot of them in the United States went into the Christian reality that they were doing it for all of that, and Yahweh and the Bible and so forth. And I stayed very quiet because I wanted to hang out with them. I wanted to learn. I didn't want to polarize with them. So I didn't bring up my position relative to their religious context. What I had always wanted to say was, did you ever consider that the system you are fighting against in the last 400 or 500 years is created by the same people who created the religious system and the Christian construct and all the rest of it.
Yeah, and it was
They
probably
didn't get
you in a
that.
past
They
lifetime sort of thing. Yeah.
Perhaps so. But the key, more important than that, was the enemy construct, the construction that one allows our own schism, our own polarized internal landscape that we project outward, and we create anybody or everybody or anything as the enemy. And so if it's an enemy, we have to go to battle with it. If we go to battle, we're in war. We use commercial paper to, and I know lots of guys who did this, and I did quite a number of things as well, but they were in their face out there, I'm going to war. I'm David and this is Goliath, and I'm bringing the monster down. And the sure result was they all went to prison. Okay. Because they didn't have the status or the standing to do what they were doing. So we were creating commercial paper, international promissory notes and bills of exchange and things like that, doing all these things to become a supposed secured party against the franchise. And we won't go into it now because it's too detailed and technical as to the what or why. But the bottom line is, every single time when Johnny Liberty went to jail, Sean David Morton, and dozens and hundreds and thousands of others, is because they were being set up. They didn't understand the nature of estate law, trust law, the Sestake V, who is a living beneficiary versus who is remember I said there's two phrases, Sestake V, which means the living beneficiary, and Sestake trust. And the Sestake trust is what is created that holds in trust the beneficial interest of our estate, but it's held apart from our ability to direct and control it. And that's attached to the decedent estate. And all they're doing is they're dealing with ghost. We're on a ghost ship, a ship lost on sea. And we have these metaphors in movies and books about the ghost ships and stuff like that. But when one wants to visit with the dead, what do? They have a seance and they summons the dead. And what does the dead do when you can interact with it? It appears. So what do they do when they want you in their court? They summons you and you appear. Okay. So they consider you dead. They have done a seance. They've done their black magic, their rituals and rites and everything. And they've summoned you. Come here, wraith, dead being. We're summoning you to our cult of death.
This must have happened to you, Ken, on a number of occasions. You must have been potentially summoned to court, or you must have had IRS people coming around to talk to you and asking you why you haven't done tax returns and so on and so forth. But the whole sort of thing, I always, when I looked at that Johnny Liberty stuff and I looked at some of these other people, I thought it was the time they started to create like banking structures and kind of finance structures within their own, I'm not sure the right word, their own community, their own jurisdiction, private society. When they started to do that, it seemed like the antennae went up with the the overall body, and war was effectively pronounced on them, and they ended up
exactly
at war, and these people pulled them into court, and that was that. So how have you managed to kind of avoid that? Because you must have been summoned surely sometime or other.
Very little, virtually hardly anything. For one, again, because I had done a lot of personal work going back to my early years. I mean, I've been studying metaphysics and spiritual paths since I was like 7 years old, and started getting into a lot of things in my teens and so forth, and went through a lot of quite deep and cathartic processes. So that's what defined my path since my early 20s. And when I started getting into law, which was just hardly started, 89, 90, but 90, 91 into 92, I stopped filing tax returns in 1988.
Right.
And of course, like everything else in that system, 1 to 2, possibly 3 years will go by, and then they will start trying to come after you. Well, for one thing, I was very transient. I was living in one place, and the next place, and the next place, and so it wasn't easy to find.
Right.
Secondly, I did gain a lot of knowledge starting in 1993, 4, 5, because once I started on this path, and I committed myself, I'm not going to go into that game. I'm not going to pay taxes. I'm not going to file returns. So I started studying primarily at that time the tax code,
right,
and dealing with it on that basis. Now, within the closed system of the IRS code and so forth, there's many, many, many aspects where they are, most people would say they're acting fraudulently. I would just say they're abrogating the duties within which they should be bound and limited based on their binding authority, the tax code or the United States code. But in the open system, the larger whole system, they can do that because they're managing property of the United States, which is under emergency banking authority, war powers, and things like that. That too is too much to get into, but the bottom line is that they do have the authority to do what they do.
Yes.
Even if they break their codes, because the superseding construct is that if somebody is not following the rules, it's just like if I'm a member of American Express or Costco. I don't know if you have Costco over there, but
yeah, we do. Yeah, absolutely.
okay, so it's a membership organization.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a society.
Yeah.
This is how everything's been created. The Catholic Church is a society. The Jesuits are a society. America, the United States, is a society.
Yeah.
Society creates its own law form, jurisdiction, courts, and blah, blah, blah. And so you have to agree when you become a member, you accept the benefits and you agree to the rules.
Yeah.
Okay. And when you do anything outside of the rules, you're considered an enemy combatant who has now become a belligerent, which means
Right.
taking up arms against the conquering or occupying military force.
Yeah. So Van Hove and all these other guys, are seen by the system as belligerents who have taken up arms against the system. It's just a matter of right, we're going to get you guys.
And see, a piece of paper in commerce is an instrumentality of war, because it's a field of battle. This is why they call it, after the Patriot Act was passed, paper terrorism or domestic terrorism, because the federal zone is a domestic zone. The United Kingdom commercial zone is a domestic zone, and so forth. So if you have accepted their benefits, then you must follow the rules of the codified membership society.
Right.
And
so your society doesn't accept their benefits whatsoever. You've severed those beneficial links. Yeah.
Right. And therefore we, and you reference us as a private contract association. Well, that association under private contract is within the society. Okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So we created the society. We created an office that holds the assets of the society, and I, as the office holder, can direct those assets to fulfill the mission purpose of the society. And this is recognized in the IRS code and worldwide. Right. And so they don't have the authority.
So I was going to say, you that's how you've kept your head down for 8 years, all those,
well, 30 years, because 30 years, I stopped filing 30 years ago. And they did send me their letters and so forth. And I did gain a lot of knowledge in between 91 and 95 to deal with them, which I did, up until, 95, 96, they stopped dealing with me. Certain things happened, I won't go into the detail, but a couple of things I did in the mid to late 2000s kind of put me on their radar once again.
Right.
And they started coming back to pay me a visit 4 to 5 years ago. Well, really about 6 to 8 years ago.
Yeah.
and there was something that was legitimately a taxable event on the public side of my franchise,
Right.
that they issued a charge or a bill to create a tax. And so for the last 8 years, yes, they've been trying to attach that to me. But in my evolution from where I went, because in the 90s into the 2000s, I was pursuing commercial remedy. All those things you see on the internet, people doing secured party process, acceptance for value, discharging debt, all kinds of things.
Yeah.
All of which you cannot do if you don't have the standing, if you're a bonded surety within their society and acceptance of their codified rules.
Right.
I started figuring that out. One of the key things I figured out, or was given to understand that, was after I'd spent 15 to 20 years just totally immersing myself in all this commercial stuff and learning it and figuring it out. Somebody said to me one day, well, you know, for as long as you're in commerce, you're still in a creditor-debtor relationship. Okay.
Right.
So you're still attached to debt. Okay. You're still in a polarized system. You're not free. So if you really want true freedom, you have to remove yourself from that creditor-debtor relationship. And the supposed remedy in commerce was, I'm a secured party creditor. Okay.
Right.
Well, what are you a creditor to? The debtor, which is the franchise.
Yes.
Okay, which is part of the United States. Except I'm still the surety that guarantees that debt. So if I create more debt on the franchise and say it's an obligation of the United States is going to come back and say, yeah, but you're the guarantor. So you just piled another $100 billion of debt onto yourself.
So you have to swap then the kind of trustee level, so they become like the guarantor and you become the beneficiary.
Right. So you reclaim your estate, you do all the things that's required to settle the decedent estate.
Yeah.
And that's basically, you know, I mean, it is actually written in the Bible, because the Bible is a layered document. You know, at the top layer is the bondage layer of the mind and the heart through religious indoctrination. The next level is the commercial layer, where it goes into how commerce works. Next layer below that is equity, how equity resolves commercial liability and how you can claim equities. But when you don't have the standing to claim equities, you can't get out of the commercial bondage. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but most people stay at one layer to the next. But below the equitable or equity layer is the multidimensional layer, where you have your constructs of numerological, astrological, all of those things that bind the energetic greater capacity of who we are at a deeper level. So we can move through those layers, and as we do, we expand our awareness, we integrate our capacity, and we remove ourselves from that field of battle.
Yeah.
So to make a long story short, I evolved through that process.
There was one part
over the last 30 years, especially.
Yeah. There was one part of that process which maybe you can clarify for me, Ken. I just remember reading it about 3 years ago. Maybe I don't know when it was, but I tried to find it actually before we had the interview today, and I couldn't find it anymore. It was on the internet maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and it said that you had been instructed to go to one of the courts, and I think it was because of some monetary issue where within the society you created your own monetary system, and I just remember they had put some form of court case on, you know, ask you to go to court because of that. But obviously you haven't gone to court, so maybe I misread it, or maybe it didn't happen. But can you clarify for that for me?
Sure. What you're referring to is the interview I did with Jeff Berwick.
Right.
Okay. Did you watch that?
I don't think I have, no.
Okay.
It was written down somewhere on the internet as a statement that you'd been called to court for financial, I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, okay, I don't recall that. Most of what I, for lack of a better term, reveal or expose to the public, and we keep most of all of this private.
Right, yeah.
As you know, we do have some of my presentations and so forth that are on our YouTube channel. But that's like the tip of the iceberg. And that's done purposefully, not because we want to create ourselves as elite or whatever. It's because we are a private society.
It protects you as well. It must protect
it's protection. Yeah.
Absolutely.
When you do the steps that we do as status correction, everything we've talked about, what you do become, and you declare it, and you notify the United States and the world bodies, you are now a non-enemy, non-combatant, non-belligerent, non-bankrupt, neutral in the public, and at peace with the United States. See, they can't handle peace. They only know war. And so when you're neutral in the public, it means you will do no harm to the public, which means you will not allow yourself to be recontracted or rebonded to become to create new public debt. Right. And does so anything that they try to create.
Yeah, I was going to say, if they tried to set up, like a speeding fine, or, if you have some sort of conflict with somebody, what you're really saying is that you have to have the emotional maturity, or the maturity as a living being standing on the land, to be able to handle yourself with people around you, so you don't cause conflict, and it doesn't give them the excuse then to take you and haul you off into court.
Right. Well, that's exactly it. But additionally, before that even happens, if you've corrected your status, see, prior to that, you have no authority, no standing to object to what you've already authorized them to do by contract. You've authorized them to access the value that accrues during your lifetime to your underlying ancestral estate that you abandon, and they became an executor of, because there's no executor to administer it. So all the bureaucracy, the ticket writers, the tax bill creators, the utility bills, the rental agreements, all of them, they're authorized agents for the master corporation to manage its property and maintain the public monetary system based on how it's structured within bankruptcy and all the rest of it.
I mean, you did say you did say at the beginning that to do this you have to really commit, and you said it is a long process to understand this, and I think it's coming across now. I'm understanding it a lot better from what you're saying, what you've done.
Sure.
And it is highly complex. But
as a collective society. As a society, what we've constructed is a meeting place for people worldwide through electronics, where we're constantly helping each other. So there's a support system. That was one of the key things that I saw was lacking in the whole law movement for the last 30 years. People who gained knowledge and seemingly had successes in the courts or whatever, then they would go out and go on the circuit. They would do seminars, things like that. But there was no continuity, and a lot of people were left dangling. Well, how do I do this? A lot of people took the plunge and did things that they didn't really know what they were doing, had no support for it, and got themselves in trouble. So we've corrected that deficit by creating the mutual benefit kind of environment that our society is constructed on. Don't ask a question. I know you're about to. Let me finish going back to your question about the court situation. So once I realized 6, 7, 8 years ago, started understanding all of this, started understanding the debtor-creditor relationship was a dead end and a return ticket back into the matrix. Then I started understanding the estate structure, and I started understanding, even though I've been involved with trust for almost 30 years, I didn't fully understand it till I started studying the equity aspect of it and how trust law works in synergy with estate law. And so everything you've described is, when you're the bonded surety, you've given them the authorization to monetize your franchise by issuing commercial paper. So a bill or a ticket or a citation or a court order or an indictment, all those things are monetizing the franchise off of the underlying value. Okay. So it's like I've got a pile of gold in my private vault, and it's been audited, and the world knows that I have 10,000 units of gold. I can issue paper against that as demand instruments I can give it to you. It says, on demand, I will give you 1 ounce of gold. So that's as good as gold because it's a legal binding obligation on my warehouse. It's a warehouse receipt. So you can give it to somebody else because you gave me value and we made this agreement, and give it to the next guy and you say, well, I've got this warehouse receipt from Ken's private vault and it's as good as gold. And he looks at it and says, okay, I'll accept it as payment. Okay. That's what they do without the gold, but our life substance that we've monetized are allowed to be monetized.
Yes.
So every time they issue a commercial instrument, it's a contract. It's an offer to contract to become the surety and the trustee for this public liability.
Right.
But once you've corrected your status, everything they try to give you, you have the standing and authority to accept it as a equitable deed and retain the equitable interest and appoint them as trustee, and the trustee always has the liability.
Well, that's what you did with the IRS man who came to you, wasn't it? You swapped the actual the actual trust itself. It became the other way around, so that he became the trustee rather than And I actually reported him to a division of the IRS, which is called the CID, which stands for Criminal Investigation Division, which investigates tax crimes. Right.
And I reported an IRS officer for tax evasion to the CID. And also something called TIGTA, which is Treasury.
It's very brave to do that.
I know. And TIGTA, which is Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration. So I sent them a copy of it, and I got a call from a special Treasury agent who called me to come visit him. I visited him. I told him the story, and I gave him everything he needed, filed a formal complaint, and I never heard from that IRS officer again. But then 3 years later, last summer, they tried a different approach. And they sent a whole nother, group at me. But they were really trying to penetrate to Panterra.
Yeah.
And because of everything, I'm not going to go into the detail, but because of everything that we've built and the entire structure, including maintaining that we're at peace with the United States and the Holy See. Because if you go on our website, our notice website, panterrapca.org, there's world notices, public notices that went to the world bodies and to the Holy See, and we declared peace.
Right.
So now we turn it around.
You say they tried to get you though just last year. I mean, I noticed that you changed your articles of establishment in 2017.
Yeah, in the court.
It was that in response to them trying to penetrate into Panterra?
No, that was just because of the knowledge that we had built from 2013 to 2017 in terms of equity and how that related to both commerce and other things.
Right.
The articles were deficient. So I just rewrote them to integrate that. So no, it had nothing to do with that, but it had to do with our maturing and perfecting the integrated whole understanding and application of how the system really works.
You see, you're an expert, Ken. I mean, you've been doing this for 30 more years, and I suppose if I just sort of look at it from the perspective of somebody just off the street doing this, and if a gang of the posse gets rounded up by the IRS and the FBI and the whoever, and they come around and see you, a lot of people are going to feel very vulnerable. I mean, is this why you've effectively created a way where they can contact you and the society so that you can support them?
Well, people become members, and then as a member, they have access on the Gemstone University site to all of the base level of the education. And we don't, except in some instances where we determine, okay, this can work for somebody to move in a more expedited time frame. We don't want people to be doing this, coming in and see, a lot of the things in the law movement were, come on, take my weekend seminar and here's 3 papers, you do this and you're free. Okay. We say, no, minimum, this is going to take you 1 to 3 years.
Yeah, I can
But
see
the other factor is think in terms of the fact that 30 years ago when I started, you couldn't find more than one person in every million or 3 million people who you could talk to about this.
Yeah.
Now look at what has happened in the collective consciousness in 30 years.
Yeah.
Now we have literally tens of millions of people who are aware of this. They may not understand it. They may not be educated, but they're aware of it. That's a collective consciousness that has risen or elevated itself to a level where you come into the quantum field of that knowledge and awareness, which is what we have built. And the assimilation of that happens a lot quicker. So what took me 25 years to figure out, because it is my nature, and it is, like you were saying, we have a lot of past lives that we dipped into all the realities on this planet throughout time. As we do the inner work and we clear the bondage, because a lot of it has to do with the inner bondage, then who we really are and our inherent capacity to really understand this is greatly expanded and greatly accelerated. So what took me 25 years can easily take someone who really does the work 2 years. Okay. And now we have hundreds of people doing it. In a year, we'll have thousands. And what we've done for the last 6 years is built the infrastructure, the data systems, the documentation, the merge systems, and everything for people to not have to do 30 years of work. Okay. And so ultimately it's education, inner work, and also a good dose of patience. So what we do say to people who show up and say, oh, I got tax problems, I got this court issue, I got this blah, blah, blah. We say, you know what? You're going to have to figure out how to get those settled. We do not recommend or encourage you whatsoever to do anything contrary to the system you are already in, you're contracted in. You're going to have to settle it, whichever way. Negotiate, do bankruptcy, whatever. Get yourself.
I was going to say that I suppose the key sort of thing here with where we're heading towards it's this group consciousness growing and growing, and we're seeing it within even like the women's movement and the Me Too campaigns, and there's a consciousness growing on the planet, and it's amazing what you're doing, because you are quietly just growing this consciousness without provoking people like a lot of these other people have done. Because I mean the way I saw Van Howe and Sean Morton and all these sorts of people, I think that like you say, the big mistake was they were kind of going to war against the system, and the system just flattened them. And I think the difference from my perspective, what you're doing, you're quietly building a consciousness that is pervading, and it's starting to get really, really, a hold now. And it feels like, there'll come a tipping point where the majority of the population go, enough's enough with this false system. I'm sick of being this indebted, bonded slave, and I understand it now, and I want this to stop. Do you see that tipping point happening? I don't know. How long will it take? I have no idea.
Well, it's obviously an exponential expansion that is definitely, if you take an XY graph and the X axis is time and the Y axis is consciousness or awareness, that, you start where it takes a long time on the Y bar to move an increment up the X bar or the X axis, and at a certain point it starts moving at a curve where time starts collapsing and consciousness expands.
Yes.
And so we could call awareness.
The Vedics used to see this as the precession of the equinox, as a 26,000-year period before you go from a kind of golden age to a very dark Kali age and then back again. And it feels like we're coming out of this Kali age, and we're ramping up again to, the dimensions change. In my view, it's part of the work of my partner Dr. Mangia Samantha Lawton, she sees the dimensions changing from a golden age where they're tightly together. We are very, very spiritually connected. We're multidimensionally connected. We see all the gods. We interact with the gods. Everybody does. And then as we fall, those dimensions part, and then we get to these Kali ages where we're completely blind spiritually, really. And what is happening there is that there's an opportunity to grow in the darkest world you could ever imagine by becoming conscious of the emotional interactions in that dark world. And what it feels like is we're coming out of that, and it feels like that we're getting to a point where this tipping point, this momentum will build up, and part of that whole movement towards this new golden age, which will be a higher level of consciousness than we've ever been before. It's sort of growing with the work you're doing and growing with the work lots of other people are doing across the different spectrums, and becoming conscious. Humanity as a group soul is becoming conscious, and it feels like to me, we're coming out of this darkness, and I feel that humanity's going, we've had enough. There's no more to learn. That's the key. It's no more to learn, and we need to move forward now.
Yeah. Well, I agree with all of that. The one caveat I would add to that is consider that in the control mechanism of the containment field, and I refer to the legal monetary system as a containment field, but also the esoteric aspects, whether you talk about sacred geometry or numerological or astrological, all these systems. They are systems. They are also control systems.
Yeah.
We have been trained to effectively worship them or consider them to be sacred or above who we are here, and that we have to ascend up to them and all of that. But if you really peel the layers back, what you see is they're all cyclical. So the Yuga cycle you're talking about is based on a mathematical construct, numerically, that each system is a fractal, a bigger number for the golden age, and then it's a harmonic halving or a fractal of the numeric.
I see it on a spiral. It's not a round thing. It's actually the consciousness.
Well, we're obviously moving through time and space spirally and not just on a flat plane.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in terms of the numerical system and the system, it is a cycle. It is through the suppression of our multidimensional awareness, it becomes a flat two-dimensional plane of the numerical relationship. And so you go through this golden age, oh, that's great. Or the Bible says you're going to have 1,000 years of peace. Well, why 1,000 years? Why not forever?
Yeah.
Because ultimately we're in a time-space loop cycle that is never ending in terms of the entrapment of it until we wake up enough to truly break free from it.
Yeah, I mean, waking up for me, it means becoming conscious, and the mechanism to do that. I caught a guy I know, and I borrowed his new kind of photon camera machinery, and we looked at the emotional interactions between people, and I got a hold of one of the greatest healers in the world, and I got a session with him when we filmed it, and it was just quite amazing to see the emotions moving between us in the room, and then they collapse into light as he did something. And he's well known for healing, Michael Flatley, the Lord of the Dance. He couldn't use his legs for 2 years. He's called Michael Adjudication. And but the point is that this emotional interaction sense is our evolving mechanism for evolution. So the depths of what we've created, because you said it yourself, we have created this ourselves, this matrix of
we have,
and the darkest point of it, have we reached that? Or with artificial intelligence, I mean, my company, as we said right at the beginning, just off camera, we were the first to create this AI engine built into a database in 1994. And
Right.
we were trying to help people. We were trying to help companies. And 25 years
Right.
later or whatever, it can be used really for the dark. I mean, the way machine learning and transhumanism and artificial intelligence is going, is this the last, gasp attempt of the system to control people in a way that's never done before? Or are we going to wake up, to moving forward? And your systems help us do this, to see, how they control, and before they actually start to program this whole construct we're in.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and let's get into that in a moment. But to finish my thought, that
sure,
because as I said, I've been involved with the metaphysical realities, so-called spiritual past, for almost 60 years. So I know all of them. We're not, not an expert in all of them, but I've spent a lot of time in all of them.
Yeah,
and
likewise.
Ultimately, there are hidden hooks and fatal flaws in all of them, and they're purposefully embedded. And what we're really talking about is, let's expand it to the largest level, that we're in a universe that is experimenting in creation. And the experiment is what will happen if all beings in this universe are given absolute free will. So we talk about sovereignty. Well, what is sovereignty? Well, that's essentially absolute free will. Of course, what we see now is the negative expression of that is, I'm the sovereign, I can do anything I want. If I don't like you, I'll just chop your head off. But that's self-focus. That's introversion of the creator capacity to the elevation of the little self, or the ego. And what's the ultimate expression of that is war, that I can take from you by my superior strength or my superior intellect or whatever, because, and look at, we talk about the royals, look at, the family crest of the Windsors, basically they say, might is my right.
Yes.
And they say, God is, because I am God appointed. Well, that goes back to the Sumerian, Babylonian, the descent of kings, and what you're talking about, the Anunnaki and all the rest of it. But who are those gods? Well, those are beings who have so far involuted into their own self-focus that there is no other, that all other just represents object acquisition for their own self-benefit. And that's what distinguishes a living being from a bonded fiction. That I will ascribe to your hologram of war if you give me the goodies. Now, of course, that's hierarchical, so lots of Americans get to live a very prosperous life, but the bottom 80% of the world is living in abject pain, suffering. Half of those are living
just on a point there, Ken, I get what you're saying about the gods, and but I feel that they are also going through an evolutionary cycle like we are, and it's ultimately we're kind of connected anyway. And just to finish the point on that,
okay, go ahead.
We are. If you look at the gods, they have offspring, and although they live much longer lifetimes in the sort of light body sense than we do, but these younger gods are coming through, and like younger sort of humans are coming through. There is a symbiotic relationship going on there where the whole of this is shifting, and as the older gods and the older humanity pass over, and this new wave comes through, there's an opportunity for us to really start to work together and then evolve together in a different way than this sort of system we got at the moment, which is based on war, as you say, and military control. And
sure.
So sorry. Anyway.
Well, that's okay. Well, I interrupted you, but I forgive you for interrupting my interruption, so that's okay. Well, let me just say that I don't agree with that, and let's agree to disagree, because if we discuss that, it'll take another 2 hours. So let's
don't worry.
get off to the next No, it's fine, but let's put it up to the next conversation.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
That, but consider that we're at the end of the experiment. Okay, however many billions and billions of years in this creation of this universe that has experimented what will happen with absolute free will. Because of course, the true balance of absolute free will is absolute responsibility for all of creation, not just for self. And so the quintessential expression of self-focused absolute free will is what we see occurring on this planet. And this planet is like a microcosm or a holographic microcosm of the greater whole. And the greater whole is looking on this process and seeing the end result of absolute predatory parasiticism of self-focused free will. Because that's what we're dealing with, and that's what's coming out.
Yeah,
where
I'd say the point of free will. It's like if you take the soul is sitting in a timeless position, then you can imagine that actually there is no free will on the linear planet, because the free will element sits at a soul level, not at a human level. And people think, oh well, I've got free will and I can do whatever we want. But if you consider how time works in a linear sense down here, and in a now sense, or past, present, and future, being concurrent at a soul level, then the soul has designed your life before you come down, and you're just living what the soul's designed with all other souls.
Okay. Point number 2, we disagree on. If we have absolute free will in this universe, and every unit,
we have free will. It's just at the right level. You know what I'm saying?
But you said, well, but I'm saying every unit of expression has full free will.
Yeah.
If you knew the world system the way I do, and you knew, and I know you will, and I know we will all get to this point. But the way I have come to understand it, really integrate that, is that the only mechanism of control that is available to the entire elite Kabbalistic system is that we have absolute free will, and in that free will we can voluntarily consent contractually to be bonded to their system. Yeah. That's where our power of freedom comes, or potential freedom, because we can undo that.
Yeah.
And that's what they have used. But we also are embedded and layered with the massive amount of programming, and many other things that's where the internal work comes in. That must be severed. It's not just pieces of paper externally, it's the work internally.
Yeah, I call it emotional work personally. But
So when people say, well, we have free will, and you're suggesting we don't have free will,
I'm saying we do have free will. It's just that it's free will at a soul level, and not a human kind of your body level.
Yeah, kind of thing. But our work here is to fully embody who we are totally. At all. Okay, so then that we're bringing what you're saying is a soul level free will, and we're breaking the bondage, or the bonds of control, by doing that. And ultimately, my personal perspective is those beings who have participated as parasites on our living capacity for so long, they have ultimately severed that attachment to source, to a source life stream that is creative in nature. They don't create, they use us to create. That's the definition of a parasite.
But there is only one consciousness, and it's love, and within the context of that, all these things are happening.
Sure. But in the Yuga cycle, as you described, that's a cyclical harvesting system. Right. That will collapse and destroy. Like where this system has been going is an ultimate collapse. But life cannot be destroyed, and so it would recreate itself and then start a new system. What they're trying to do with transhumanism And the end game of what, you can call it end times or whatever, is to get a voluntary contractual adherence to an eternal bondage through a fusion of their AI system, like in the Matrix, the machines versus the living, or the dead versus the living. If they're so disconnected irrevocably to a true source life stream that they cannot create anymore, and can only create by binding themselves, and conversely being bound as creators, or still in touch with our creator life stream, source life stream, that the transhumanistic, that singularity that they're aiming at, is a singularity of irrevocable, uncontestable, eternal bondage to become the battery or the life source to their AI system. So think about the AI that we've been building, that you were part of, okay? Which I won't hold it against you. But what we all have participated in, whether you are an IT engineer, or somebody else is a social engineer or a legal engineer, blah, blah, blah. The collective of the bonded and trained humanity, as a good part of which is still connected to source, but a good part of it also is irrevocably beyond that connection as the parasite that they're trying to bring together. That consider that time is not linear. That as a oversoul, we are simultaneously in all these lives, in all these dimensions, and now we're waking up to be able to draw from that capacity and integrate it into this living being that we are on this planet. That AI has been working above and beyond time and space. That we created AI and extended it into the future probability of being a transhumanistic singularity. And on a certain timeline, it went into the past to evolve the technical capability of the human race so that it would start building a computerized, globalized system built on progressively AI construction, until that AI was sufficiently globalized and had enough creator life streams attached to it by voluntary consent that it could, in effect, incarnate on the silicon matrix of the AI global system and achieve its singularity and go off into its artificial creator future that it's been trying to create.
Yeah, I mean, if all that is correct, I mean, it still sits in the context of the one consciousness of love. There's nothing detached. And I mean, when we created the first AI system, what we did was we created user-definable rules, user-definable attributes, and user-definable links. Those were the three elements that gave you so think of it in the way that you've just put it together there. Just think of somebody with free will, and that person is sitting on any computer system anywhere in the world, and they are defining links and attributes. So say a document was an attribute, and the link is, I'm sending you a document is the link. But if you expand that out to user-definable rules as well, you can actually create any system ever. And what happens is, when you create out of free will these nodes, billions of nodes everywhere, it's automatically generating the central database is being upgraded all the time. So this free will situation is creating whatever system, and it was totally user definable what we allowed people to do, or what they could do. It wasn't about us allowing anything, and it was just a toolkit to allow that. But as the central database grew from these free will nodes, the whole thing had a dynamic which evolved. It was like looking at evolution. And what I feel we're doing, in a sense, is that as humans, we're doing that through emotional interactions. I've captured this on photon cameras now, type cameras, and these interactions that are going on between us all the time are those free will interactions. And what we're doing is we are becoming conscious beings, and we are evolving through that consciousness. And it takes a deep dive, you know, which we've all planned to interact with these beings and everything else, but we're coming out of that now to an extremely high level of consciousness. And artificial intelligence, even if it goes the way you said there, you know, it's still within the context of love. It's still in the context of the overall consciousness of everything.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah, I think we've been going about 2.5 hours almost now. So I'm just
no, I think we can wrap up. But
yeah, do you want to respond?
I will,
to that?
Yeah, I will, and then we'll wrap up and
cool.
Let's revisit all this round 2, okay? So, I understand what you're saying, and of course, what drives me is what we would call love of humanity, love of life, love of creation, love of my wife, who is standing here now. But in the
hello, hi, nice to meet you.
in as I was saying, in this experiment of ultimate, say, absolute free will. So if we call it an experiment, say this is a creational field that we entered into, that was at one point an unmanifested creational field, because creation is continually creating. Okay.
Yeah.
And this was the basic tenet of, okay, let's see what happens. Okay. And at a certain point, some groups of beings said, well, you know, if we have free will, we can take what we want from others, and we'll invent this thing called war.
Yeah.
Okay. And we'll use violence and death and destruction as our free will expression.
Right.
Some people, many, quite a few in the New Age movement, I characterize it as a New Age concept, will say, well, it was just a game. We just took it on to explore and see what would happen. And some took on the light side and some took on the dark side. Well, you know, there is ultimately responsibility.
Yeah.
Okay. For what one has created. And that's why I say that true unlimited free will must be balanced with full responsibility. And you're either responsible to life, or you're, you know, only self-focused in a progressively more and more entrenched cult of death. Ultimately, when the host eschews or releases itself from a parasite, because the parasite host has only one ultimate terminus point of its life stream, which is the death of the host.
Yeah.
It's sort of a given. The parasite will ultimately kill the host. Okay, so this is a parasite, an aspect of consciousness, and beings who aligned with it, who said, okay, in free will, I'm going to align with this cult of death. I'm going to align with war. I'm going to align with the absolute destruction that I'm capable of doing. At a certain point, that ceases to be love, and I do not accept the New Age concept of, you know, yeah, they just took on the dark suit, we took on the light suit, and blah, blah, blah. Well, at a certain point, the host says, enough is enough. Now we have enough data in this experiment to know what absolute free will, devoid of responsibility or only self-focus, will produce.
Sure.
And so we're in the process of cleansing the host. We are the host. The planet is the host. The universe is the host.
Yeah.
And so I don't see that those who have participated are going to get some sort of, at the end, free will, free get out of jail free pass. They're going to be held responsible karmically for what they created. One thing that I've come to, for myself, determine is that the debt system was an off lane of karmic responsibility, so that if you died in debt, you could be rebonded, because they said, well, you still owe us because we gave you this benefit and you created debt. So now you have karmic debt, but we're going to offset our karmic debt onto your karma because you owe us the monetary debt and we get to recycle you. Well, that's all ending. It's all ending. In the end, which we're at, everybody will be responsible for what they've created and have to face themselves. So I believe those beings who have participated are beyond that capability, and their fate will have, we'll see what happens with them. But we have enough data in the experimental model to understand free will now and what happens in the context of what I've described. So, love is everywhere, love is manifest, love is eternal. But those who have completely become so self-focused, are devoid of it. And so we shall see. And we shall, for the time being, agree to disagree. And in closing, I would direct you and your members and anybody else who watches this to go to the Gemstone University site. It's www.gemstoneuniversity.org. That's how it sounds, Gemstone, as in rubies, emeralds, sapphires, university. And on the front page are two documents. One is our master plan, which is on the left side, and right in the center, just below the quote that we have there, which is from Gutta, which includes that phrase, those who think themselves free are the most enslaved, or paraphrased. None are more enslaved than those who think that they are free.
Absolutely.
Just below that quote is a video player, and below that is a green bar that you click on. It's a document that I finished a month or so ago. It's called The Overview of the World System, and it integrates all of this, and it's a very helpful document.
Right. Excellent.
So have a look, and
will do. And the Panterra d'Ora PCA. What is the website and the email or whatever?
That's and just to wrap up one point I made halfway between that. Panterra is a society. We've created our own court, law form, jurisdiction, all of that.
Yes. Inside
of which we have a membership body, which is called a private contract association, because in law, contract is the highest authority in law, because it corresponds to free will. So contracts must have all the required elements of meeting of the minds and all the rest of it. And the contract basis of our society is mutual benefit, that people come in, they have the benefit of everything. So there is benefit responsibility relationship, but it's based on the benefit of what we've created and the responsibility to be a contributing member. So that's the private contract, and the right for private contract and the right of private association is really paramount in the world system. And so that's another layer of protection. So that website that you can learn a lot about the foundation and the documents I've mentioned, as far as our notices to the world, is panterrapca.org, and that's Panterra with 2 R's.
Can you spell that, Ken?
Yeah, PANTERRAPCA.org.
Great. Okay, got that. Well, thank you so much for being interviewed today. I've really enjoyed talking to you. And we must do it again. I thank you for your time. We've spent best part of 2.5 hours now talking, and I really appreciate you spending this time and talking to everybody who's part of the Hidden Knowledge of the Elite course.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Okay, I enjoyed it as well.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Ken. Bye bye now.